Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's 5 o'clock, so let's get together with our meeting. Members of council, you have an agenda before you. There's just one change that we'd like to make is to move 9.3, the Regional Agriculture Master Plan update, to 9.1, and then having the other ones just fall in line after that. Okay. That's it. Deputy Mayor, the motion to adopt the agenda, please.
Yes. The Town Council adopted September 27th, 2021 regular council meeting agenda as presented.
Okay. Thank you. Members of council, I'll call the question. All those in favor? That's carried. Moving on to number 3 of our agenda is a public input session. This is the time that we allow residents to speak and address council on any issue that's not on the agenda. Administrative staff, has anybody registered to speak?
Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. We do have an individual who has registered to speak for this evening. Just the one has pre-registered with us. So just a reminder, as per the procedural bylaw, there's 15 minutes total allotted for public input session, and each speaker is allowed up to 5 minutes to address council, and I will be timing that this evening.
Okay, thank you very much. Go ahead and call the first one, please.
The individual is Byron.
Go ahead.
My name is Byron Badgery, a local resident, and I'm here to discuss COVID restrictions in place here in Stony Plain in Alberta. The current restrictions that the town of Stony Plain has decided to follow under the current Alberta Record of Decisions CMOH Order 43/2021, which is the Restrictions Exemption Program, is in violation of federal law Bill S-201. Thus, I recommend the council to opt out of the Restrictions Exemption Program and follow the Alberta Record of Decision CMOH Order 44/2021, where indoor capacity is limited to 1/3 of the total operational occupant load and maintain physical distance of 2 meters. As a father of a 6- and 3-year-old, and due to the Alberta Restrictions Exemption Program, I'm not permitted to enter any public indoor spaces as I'm not vaccinated, even though I have immunity, and I refuse to take a PCR test for entry based on my rights under the Bill S-201. Thus, I cannot take my son's public skating or accompany my son into the arena to help him get dressed or to play hockey under the Restrictions Exemption Program. There are many parents who have removed their kids from sports due to this program. I would like to volunteer and coach, and these activities are also restricted when the town of Stony Plain opted into the Restrictions Exemption Program. This program is essentially a vaccine passport that allows the vaccinated with extremely beneficial privileges and non-vaccinated individuals to pay for a roughly $50 PCR test, which is a financial burden, and must prove that they're negative for COVID as a condition of entry. Meanwhile, vaccinated individuals do not need to prove that they're negative for COVID. Approximately 1/3 of ICU cases are vaccinated individuals. Thus, vaccinated individuals get COVID and do spread COVID. Let's prevent the spread and not create a division between unvaccinated and vaccinated. I personally and legally believe the exemptions program to be discriminatory and not the safest program to stop the spread of this deadly virus. By following CMOH Order 44/2021, which restricts indoor capacity to 1/3 and maintain 2-meter social distancing, would be the best COVID protocols to follow that will keep the community protected. They are fair and non-discriminatory and protect the town from legal liability. Please let me explain why this exemption program discriminates me and others by asking for a PCR test, i.e. a genetic test, and thus violates Bill S-201. Bill S-201 is a federal law. It is an act to prohibit and prevent genetic discrimination. It's Statutes of Canada 2017, Chapter 3, assented on May 4th, 2017. Under interpretation, a genetic test means a test that analyzes DNA, RNA, or chromosomes for purpose such as the prediction of disease or vertical transmission risks or monitoring, diagnosis, or prognosis. Let me repeat, a genetic test means a test that analyzes DNA, RNA, or chromosomes for purposes such as prediction of disease or monitoring. As per Canada.ca website, a lab-based PCR is a nucleic acid test, also known as molecular test, amplifies very small amounts of genetic material. Thus, it's a genetic test. So underneath Bill S-201 prohibitions, a genetic test is prohibited for any person to require an individual to undergo a genetic test as a condition of providing goods or services to that individual. And those then refusal to undergo genetic test under Chapter 3, 2 is prohibited for any person to refuse or engage in an activity described in any of the above paragraphs. Bill S-201, offenses and punishment. Contravention of sections 3 to 5. Every person who contravenes the sections 3 to 5 is guilty of an offense and is liable of a fine up to $1 million or imprisonment of a term not exceeding 5 years or both. The purpose of this act, underneath paragraph 2, a shortened version, is that all individuals have an opportunity and equal with other individuals without being hindered or prevented from doing so by discriminatory practices based on race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, age, sex, genetic characteristics. So, my time's up.
Thank you very much for speaking and bringing your comments.
Thank you.
Administration, has anybody else registered?
Your worship, members of council, we have had no other individuals register to speak for this evening.
Okay. Members of council, seeing that there's nobody else registered, moving on to our next agenda item, which is presentations and delegations. Number 4 is a presentation from the TLC Center for the 2022 budget presentation. And we'll just give them a couple minutes to set up.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. Pleased to be here this evening to present the 2022 draft budget for council's consideration. Joined here this evening with Mr. Jerry George, our vice chair, and one of Stony Plains public representatives on the board. The 2022 budget was certainly a challenge to develop, as you can likely imagine, with a lot of unknowns still in terms of the after effects of COVID-19. Administration took a conservative approach to revenue generation and, as such, reduced expenses accordingly as much as possible. This evening, we're going to briefly go over the TLC peak priorities, address and highlight the 2022 key objectives, and then we'll jump into the detailed budget, speaking to revenues and expenses, cost recovery. We'll speak to our capital and infrastructure request for 2022 and the approach we're requesting consideration for funding it, and then get into the detailed breakdown of municipal contribution for the 3 categories: operating, capital, and infrastructure. In the TLC Board of Directors long-term strategic plan, they identify the 4 peak priorities as personnel, engaging stakeholders, asset management, and key service levels. A review of the 2021 key objectives that administration is proposing to focus on will be also included. We'll get into details around the operating revenues, like I mentioned, and then we'll take questions certainly at the end. So looking forward to 2022 key objectives. First, in the employee engagement, safety, development, and recognition category, We're continuing to forge ahead and trying to prepare our organization for a core audit. This has been delayed pretty significantly throughout COVID. We're in a fairly healthy place to begin that process, and then the course of 2 shutdowns, recalling staff, those types of things has certainly delayed that. And so we're intending, again, barring any long-term impacts heading into 2022, to be completed that by the end of the first quarter. We're also going to continue to provide opportunities for staff input and satisfaction in the forms of an in-house survey. Previously, we had gone through 3 years of Great Place to Work survey, which took a look at the long-term satisfaction of staff in a number of ways. That comes at a fairly significant cost, and so the board took a different direction for this year and looking at doing something internal as a break from that, and then we would look to return to that process in a couple of years and gauge where we're at on that radar. Additionally, a priority was identified pertaining to staff training and customer experience within the facility. So trying to, again, in-house training, which would be over time, would be factored into all of our departments, in-house training, whether it's their in-services in aquatics or team meetings, that type of thing, so that we have a consistent approach to customer experience across the organization. Right now, we feel we've got a very good customer service approach, but there's some baseline tactics and approaches that we feel would be beneficial if it was consistent across the board. So an additional focus in that area, is we finally, at long last, were able to complete an upgrade to our IntelliLeisure software, which is our registration database, membership database, program registration software that we're now able to do a lot more online. So we've already seen people being able to register online when we were doing pre-booked time slots in the pool and in the other amenities. They're able to do that online without having to take up staff time phoning and checking spreadsheets and reaffirming people's places in line. Eventually going forward, though, we want to be able to do even more with that. So membership registration, booking of fitness classes, whether it's drop-in or prepaid, that type of thing. So there's a lot to look forward to for sure. And then I'll get into the building enhancements a little bit more detail, but at a high level, we're looking to replace our condenser in the arena, replace our fitness equipment, which we do on a cycle or a life cycle plan, replacing certain pieces every year. We'll speak to a locker retrofit in our change rooms that we want to proceed with in terms of phase 1, and then some work around some new legislation around pool anti-entrapment. We've got some work that we need to do in terms of a retrofit there. So overall, our revenues, we're projecting to have a revenue of about just over 5.2 million, with our operating expenses less depreciation of about 7.2 million, which would leave an operational cost recovery of 72.37%. Digging into a little bit of the details, 2022's revenue budget is reduced from 2021 by about $300,000, which is, I guess speaking to 1 year prior, about $1 million less than a typical year. So comparing 21 to 22 obviously is a challenge because we know we're still seeing a lot of restrictions and facility closures and stuff that have impacted us. So when we compare it to 2019, which is our last quote-unquote normal year, we're projecting about $1 million less in revenue overall. And like we said, we did remain somewhat conservative for 2022, hoping that we were on the right path, and then of course recently some additional changes were made to impact our operations again. So in looking at the the 4 categories, memberships and passes about 2.3 million, program and services we're projecting will remain relatively the same. We have had a very successful program registration in the fall, especially in our swim lessons that were long overdue and lots of wait lists for that, so we're trying to fill those. Facility rentals, we're anticipating a small decrease, mostly not necessarily from the regular users, so our minor sport user groups and those types of things, but it's the special events that we're not sure are going to be able to be in a place to come back, things like surface mine rescue and some of the trade shows that have come to us in the past. Not sure where that's going to be in 2022, so we'd rather be a little bit more, dial that back a little bit and hope that we're off the mark there and we bring in more revenue than anticipated. And then administrative revenues are things like our corporate sponsorship, grants, and that type of thing. So again, relatively stable there. Just comparing year over year, of course, 2020 last year was a significant decrease because of COVID, but typically we're around that 6.3 approximate million mark. And again, we're about 100,000 less at about 5.2 is what we're estimating. Flipping over to expenses, so again, to try to combat that, we did ask departments to reduce their budgets as much as possible without impacting service levels at this point. The board was pretty strong that we wanted to try to maintain our service levels as much as possible. The region's come to expect a certain service level at the TLC, and we're very proud to have tried to maintain that throughout. We do know that isn't always possible because you do have to make tough financial decisions, but we did ask departments to really cut back where they could to try not to impact that. Impacts are going to be felt, though. We definitely looked at some of those additional items such as staff training and development, some minor changes to our program offerings, materials and supplies reduced to as much as possible, knowing that we can't get rid of it all, and there's some operating costs just to maintain our, keep the lights on, so to speak. When it comes to utilities, even though we just finished our major electrical upgrade, our lighting upgrade, I should say, with switching to LED, we're really not sure what the future holds for that. We've seen some upward trends in the overall cost to utilities, and so we chose to keep it flatlined as potential offset, and we're hoping that, we're wrong, and that comes in under, and it's a good news item, but we'd rather aim a little bit higher and come in lower than the reverse of that and be in a deficit position. So again, our expenses, we did try to reduce as much as possible and reduce them by about $200,000 over 2021 approved budget. Again, looking at the 5-year trend, you can see on average we're in that kind of 8.3 to 8.5 million on a more typical or regular year from previous, and we're down to 7.6 for 2022. So again, about a $900,000 decrease there. Looking at cost recovery, in order to maintain our current service levels, there was a slight gap or increase in the gap between revenues and expenses, which of course is where the cost recovery level comes into play. This has resulted in an increased request in the municipal operating contribution of approximately $100,000 or 5.38% of last year. And I'll speak to that in a little bit more detail. It is anticipated over the course of 2022 that we hope that as that year goes on, there'll be a return to more typical revenue generation heading into 2023, which would then see a decrease in that request and an increase in our cost recovery. And again, we're not, can't predict that, but that's what we're hopeful for. Based on the current budget, the cost recovery rate, as I said, would be about 72.3. Looking at our capital budget, the 2022 proposed capital budget is quite a bit smaller than previous year. We are looking at replacing our ride-on mower, which is well past its annual replacement. We've kind of limped it along as much as we could, but it's definitely due for replacement, as well as our annual fitness equipment replacement. So we replace a certain number of pieces every year. We were able to reduce that ask this year, of course, because last year there wasn't as much use of being closed, but there were certain pieces that certainly are in need of replacement to maintain our ability to keep people in the facility and using different pieces of equipment. In order to reduce the municipal contribution request, administration is actually recommended to our board that the capital budget be funded by carry-forward funds from previous capital and infrastructure projects that came in under budget. Currently, there's approximately $143,000 in unallocated carry-forward funds, and should the board and councils approve this funding approach, there would still be about $50,000 to cover any unanticipated expenses to current or future capital and infrastructure requests. So although the budget we're proposing is $93,000, the request in the municipalities, if you approve this budget or this funding process, would actually be zero request in the municipalities. Looking at our infrastructure side, fairly significant ask this year, and we've got a couple of major items that need tending to. First and foremost is our evaporative condenser and cooling tower for the arenas. That item is well past its life expectancy, and we're now to the point of extending it any further may risk losing the ice at a period of time, so it's due to be replaced. And the other items that are listed there, we've got 1 or 2 of our air handling units that are due for replacement, our heat exchanger, refrigerant compressors and pumps. Locker retrofit phase 1. So what we're looking to do is to try to address the concern around locker break-ins and thefts. We're looking to improve our lockers and use a more rigid locking mechanism, which would be we would convert them instead of a coin locker, they would be a free locker with a combination so that they could be easily changed every time a user comes in. And these are in place in City of Edmonton and a few other facilities who have gone this route. You are giving up a bit of revenue that you would get from the coin locker, but you've got a lot more control over the type of locker, the security, the secureness of those lockers. And City of Edmonton, for example, has had significant decrease in their theft incidents since going to these type of lockers. So we'd like to take a portion of our lockers and replace them as a trial run to see if we see the same results before we jump full in and replace them all, because it is a costly venture. So we're looking to do a component of that as part of phase one. In our preschool program, we've got a very successful preschool program that we're proud of. They're using a space that was a meeting room, essentially, and has been there for a lot of time. And as that program has developed and grown, it's kind of reached its capacity there. And so we're looking to enhance, with a small amount of money in upgrades, turn that into a true program space instead of a meeting space converted to a preschool space. Just gives them a little more ownership in there and a lot more flexibility in terms of program setup and takedown and storing items in there and those types of things. So we're looking to do a small renovation to our upstairs space. And then the last piece to speak to is our pool anti-entrapment retrofit. So a couple of years ago, Alberta Health Services updated their requirements. And in a lot of pool facilities, there's some renovations and upgrades and retrofits that need to take place to meet the new anti-entrapment legislation. And so we're still working on what that's going to look like, mainly in our main tank and our leisure pool, because there's different options that we're looking at. But for now, we want to make sure that we've got some money in the budget, because we do have to move forward with it. We just don't have a confirmation of exactly what that's going to look like. So for now, we're requesting to put $50,000 into the budget for that. We're hopeful that that's going to be enough, but it's going to really depend on, there's a couple of options that if they come to fruition in terms of a new approval process for a cover, that'll significantly reduce the costs. But if we have to do more work, then that $50,000 is probably more reasonable of where that's going to be. So again, administration is proposing a bit of a different approach this year. Instead of asking 100% of the funding to come as a new ask from municipalities, we're looking to request 50% of the cost of our infrastructure ask to come out of our restricted reserve. The only previously approved use of restricted reserve to this point was the recently completed lighting retrofit. The current reserve has a balance of $657,000 of unallocated funds. The lighting retrofit had been approved for up to $250,000, but that project came in significantly less than anticipated, so we're actually anticipating a good chunk of that $250,000 to be put back into the reserve, which would mean that there'd be approximately $800,000 of unallocated funds in that reserve. Should the recommendation be approved to utilize the funds to cover the $365,000 approximately, this would leave $435,000 for future years projects, so still fairly a healthy capital or infrastructure reserve. Additionally, administration will be applying for a CIP grant, which could cover up to $125,000 towards these projects. And so we're budgeting as if we're not going to get it, but if it comes in, then obviously we would return that additional money back to the reserve. So in summary, and just as a high level look at the total ask of the municipalities. So again, the operating request, as I mentioned before, is up about $100,000. Our capital is requesting zero if that's funded from previous year's surplus. Infrastructure being 50% covered for a total of just around $2.36 million, which is up about $200,000 compared to last year, but with a significant investment into the infrastructure for those items that I mentioned previously. So just in summary, again, overall revenues have decreased by about 5.4%, expenses by about 2.5%, and that's where the difference in the increased operating request. Cost recovery at 72.34. We know that, and as you know, this obviously was prepared ahead of last week's announcements, and so we are still trying to adjust to those, but we will see residual impacts of COVID-19, as will all organizations heading into 2022, and so we're hoping that we've budgeted conservatively enough for that. And with a return, or anticipated return to more typical self-generated revenues in 2023. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions council may have.
Okay, thank you much for your presentation. Members of council, any questions for clarity and understanding on that presentation? Councilor Lowry?
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you to the General Manager and our resident representative for the presentation this evening. I do have one question, and I will go back to the page that you mentioned it on. It was on slide 12 of 15, which is page 19 of our package, talking about the infrastructure funding request. You've mentioned in here you have the restricted surplus of $364,875 and a 2022 municipal request of $364,875. You then talked about the Community Improvement Program grant, the SIP grant, and if you received that grant, those monies would actually go back into the reserve. And I'm curious if the consideration is there that if the CIP grant does come to fruition and is received, that it actually be used to offset a portion of the municipal request, so less dollars have to come from the municipality rather than going into a reserve, which you mentioned at $435,000 is already quite healthy.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Laurie and the rest of Council, absolutely, we could put that contingency on it. I know in the past it's been a delicate balance because those dollars would have already been requisitioned or part of that, but I know with spring budget adjustments and those types of things, certainly we would communicate back through the general managers if we were successful and then look for direction from the 3 municipalities. So definitely take note of that though.
Excellent, thank you. And one more, if I may, Your Worship. Excellent, thank you. You spoke a little, this is a little bit more about this year and just understanding as to what the potential impacts for the rest of 2021 are going to look like and how that might play into, as you mentioned, spring adjustments. We've heard a little bit already this evening about the restrictions exemption program and how that's integrated into recreation facilities. And my understanding is if the recreation facility does not go into the restriction exemption program, although the reduction in capacity of 1/3 may not necessarily be a large burden, correct me if I'm wrong, but that means all adult sports programs, therefore all adult sport bookings would be required to be canceled. Would that result in a significant loss of revenue for the Tri-Leisure?
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Laurie and rest of Council, certainly that would be a large component. Hard to say exactly how that would play out, but I would foresee some cancelling of memberships, as a lot of those programs are the reason why people have memberships for aquafit classes, fitness drop-in classes, that type of thing. Hard to predict where that would go, because certainly there's impacts no matter which way you go. But you are correct in saying that all adult group fitness, group lessons, and group programs would have to be suspended or canceled in the interim.
And that would include all adult sport leagues such as hockey, soccer, etc. as well?
That's correct.
Excellent, thank you.
Any questions for clarity and understanding? Councillor Manning, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for the presentation. My concern is with regards to the numbers that you've presented with us tonight, or for us tonight. What if, for example, the revenues were much lower than what you're projecting? And I guess what I would like to see is maybe a range of, you know, what if some of these things, for example, that Councillor Laurie and you just spoke of, occur, or we have, you know, like lower numbers and lower revenues. What is the impact? Like, you know, what happens to expenses? Like, I can't see that, and I'm wondering if you guys have had that conversation, and what does that look like?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Matties and the rest of Council, certainly we've seen that in 2020, 2021. We've adjusted where we could. If we see that revenues are going downward instead of upward, we would certainly make, you know, the board would consider other means of reducing expenses. It could mean shorter operating hours. It could be closing for stat holidays. It could be, you know, other areas to reduce expenses. If we see that coming through, say at the end of the first quarter or at the end of the first half of the year, we would do our best to adjust expenses on that other side to compensate for that. I mean, we've tried to be fairly conservative, and when you look at, I know it's tough to compare 21 to 22, which is our typical approach when we come to councils. But when we look at 2019, which is our last typical year, there was a fairly significant projected decrease or budgeted decrease in both of those areas, and we're hoping that we've captured that. Of course, we're not 100% certain, but we would keep an eye on it certainly at the end of first quarter and look to take recommendations to the board for reducing expenses as best as we could.
Okay, sounds good. And my next question is, you had mentioned the cost of utilities potentially going up. Are there other inflationary factors that you need to consider?
Your Worship, through you to members of council, to Councillor Matties and the rest of council, not that we're aware of. I mean, we've been able to accommodate for our, you know, our collective agreement requirements. We've worked well with them in the past, and that's another approach that we could take, is to revisit that collective agreement yet again, which we did in 2021. But we're hoping that we'll be in a better spot for 22. But certainly don't know of any other inflationary costs at this point. But again, we'll keep our eye open on that.
May I just ask one more question? So with regards to the surplus, or sorry, the restricted surplus and funds going there, like what is the I guess the positive aspect of doing that, like basically just taking some out of the restricted surplus, and then also if your revenues are higher, as you had mentioned, putting it back into your reserves as opposed to the town paying less or the communities paying less. Can you give me the understanding why you gave your recommendation?
Sure. Your Worship, through to Councillor Matties and the rest of the council. The reserves are there for that very reason, to offset expenses as they come along, and they've never been, other than the lighting retrofit project, they've never been utilized. We are trying to, I guess, be cognizant of the challenges that the three municipalities are also facing when it comes to revenues and monetary generation, and so we felt this would be an appropriate time to use some of those reserves to take that load off of the municipalities. And so instead of coming forward with a $750,000 ask, we're asking for $365,000, using our reserves and knowing that if we do get a grant, certainly taking Councillor Laurie's comments to heart, and we'll take that back through the general managers. If we can save the ask even further of councils, we would certainly do that.
What does that do to the long-term, well-being of, I guess, in terms of your resilience as an organization if you don't put the reserves back? I guess I'm just trying to understand where you're at with that.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Matties and the rest of the council, speaking to the long term, of course, I've only been there 3 years. I don't think there was an intent for the organization to carry reserves necessarily. They've been built up over time just because projects have come in under budget and or the scope has changed and the monies weren't required. I think we continue to work well with our municipal representatives to balance that, because at the end of the day, the capital and infrastructure reserves, as per the MOA, all come to the municipalities for consideration to fund. And so we're trying to use those reserves now. Now is as good a time as any, we feel. Again, should the councils feel that they'd rather keep those there and fund it 100% of the ask, then certainly we would move forward with that. But the board felt that it was a good time as well to request or to use those reserves and reduce the ask of the municipalities, knowing that we're in difficult times all around.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Matties, I have a question for you. In terms of the restricted surplus, you mentioned there's over $700,000 in there. If the board is okay with transferring $365,000 to help with the capital plan, that still leaves $470,000 in there. Is that correct? Okay. My question to you is, what is an appropriate amount to hold in reserves for the TLC?
Your Worship, through you to yourself and the rest of the council, I don't have that answer off the top of my head. For the simple fact that, as per the MOA, all capital items do come forward to the municipalities for consideration. I certainly could dig into that further and get that answer back to the general managers to council, but right now I couldn't answer that with the way the organization is set up. The MOA was there to address should there be reserves, but I don't think the intention was that we would carry reserves as a standard practice.
Okay, and I asked that question because you said the reserves are generated from, projects being under budget, having a little surplus here and there, and it's just built up over time. Well, we can see on every budget there has been a municipal contribution. So tax dollars from our municipality have gone to support the TLC, which is I'm fine with, because that's what we need to do as a community to provide leisure for our community. But instead of maybe this, as you mentioned, that this is a fiscally difficult time for many municipalities. So what about the thought of using all that reserve to fund the whole $700,000? That will leave you roughly $150,000 in the restricted reserve. It takes some pressure off the municipalities, because in the long run, the municipalities have to pay for the upgrading anyways.
Your Worship, through to yourself and the rest of the council, that approach was considered as well. And it was felt both by administration and the board that finding a balance was the proper approach at this point in time, that if we drain those reserves, an emergent need, we would still have the capacity to fill an emergent need with the 400 and some thousand being left in reserve, rather than midway through a budget year coming forward with an expensive ask should something go wrong that's not planned for.
Okay. Yeah, and that's a good answer, and that's why I asked you, what is an appropriate amount to have in reserve?
Yeah.
All right, and so you guys have to decide, what is an emergent need and how much it might cost to operate a facility like the TLC. And I did appreciate that coming back. Members Council, any other questions? Councillor Bennett, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's not really a question, it's more of a comment. I just wanted to thank Lenny and Jerry for coming in tonight. And Mr. Mayor, you placed me on this board almost a year ago, and what a year it was. And we worked really, really hard in order to balance the budget and to, as Lenny said, to make sure that we're using our reserves for what it's appropriate to be used for, but yet our revenue has been hit pretty hard with all of the closures and the restrictions. So I thank you, Mr. Mayor, for putting me on that board. I learned a lot, and I wish the board all best of luck as we go finish through this and determine what will happen in the next couple of years. Thank you.
Any other questions? Maybe just a question regarding on the coin locker retrofit. I think you mentioned doing phase 1 next year. Are you doing that early next year so that a report can be provided to the 3 municipalities to see how it's working? As you mentioned, it is going to be a revenue loss to the facility, so therefore, if there's a loss, that means the municipalities are covering that loss.
Your worship, through to yourself and the rest of council, we're aiming for about May, June for a couple of reasons. Number one, if approved in December, we would start the request for proposal process, and that takes some time. Plus, we'd be finalizing the scope of the project based on budget approval. And we felt in our budget, we budgeted for about half of what we would typically bring in revenue, just to try to compensate for that partway through the year. If we're done a little bit earlier, great, but we're preparing for about a May, June, which would still see about 50% of the year to be able to bring forward recommendations for year 2.
Thank you. Any other questions from members of council for clarity and understanding? Okay, Councillor Lowry.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just one that kind of came to mind here as we continue to talk about the reserve, the restricted reserve, and you mentioned the changes that we've seen now in 2021 with restrictions coming back in. So should the Tri-Leisure come in with a revenue shortfall compared to what was budgeted for 2021, would there be consideration to use the restricted reserve to help offset that rather than having to create an ask from the municipalities in the spring adjustments?
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Lowry, rest of council, as was the case in 2020, heading into 21, we won't know the true financial picture until after year end, because the operating reserve, or the operating reserve, for lack of a better term, really isn't determined until the end of the year. So we may cover that through that adjustment like we did this past year. And should that not be the case, then we would be bringing forward to the board various options for consideration, which would then come to councils. One of them would be the restricted reserve. However, that would take a special request, because that is specifically for capital items. So we'd have to approve a transfer from that to the operating reserve, which again is an option we'd be considering and bringing forward with the pros and cons.
Excellent. Appreciate the creativity, and hopefully we don't have to see that.
Deputy Mayor.
Worship, and through you to Lenny. So I'm aware of in the past we had a public awareness campaign in regards to locking up items, as well as a partnership with local RCMP. Are we continuing that, or is the new lockers an attempt to sort of a different attempt?
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Meyer and the rest of council, we do continue that partnership. I mean, it was a little bit tricky with the closures and opening and that sort of thing. Just a few weeks ago, in fact, we had a bait bike put out in front of our facility with a tracker on it, and within a few hours it was taken, and the RCMP were able to, I'm not sure if they've yet tracked down that individual, but again, we shared our video surveillance footage with them, and so we do find creative ways to work with our partners, and they've been excellent. It certainly has been a blessing to have the detachment just down the road now, so a quicker response time for a lot of things. But this is be an added layer of prevention as well, so to kind of work together with them to see that reduction in criminal activity, hopefully.
Thank you.
Councillor Pletchko?
Yes, Your Worship, through to Lenny and his guest. Help me to understand, when you talk about the lost revenue, we're trying to prevent the amount of loss that we have at the TLC. When you talk about lost revenue on some lockers, can you substantiate what that would look like for the community if that program is to go in place?
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Pletchko and the rest of council, I think the annual revenue is about $30,000 in coin revenue. Having said that, there are also a significant cost of staff involvement in terms of providing video surveillance to RCMP, working with the RCMP, spending time on those types of incidents. And so we feel that the decrease in staff time having to address those concerns, along with the feeling of safety and security in the facility by patrons, will be a good benefit trade-off for that amount. Similar has happened in the city of Edmonton, where they've gone again away from coin-generated lockers. They've gone with this similar locking mechanism they've virtually resulted in almost zero locker thefts after they implemented it. So we're hoping that the staff time that also is saved from that will also be it's not a hard number that you can throw at it, but certainly we can put those efforts elsewhere in the facility.
Any other questions? Okay. See none, thank you very much for the presentation, and thank you for the work that you guys do on the board. I know it has not been very easy for the last 19 months, as you guys have thrown through a whole bunch of new rules and regulations from the health offices and trying to make sure that everybody's safe. And thank you for your work on that on our behalf.
Excellent. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Members of Council, that ends the presentations and delegations portion of our agenda. Moving on to number 5, which is a statutory public hearing. Today we have one, is 2651 LUO/21 Land Use Bylaw for Cannabis Amendment. Again, this is a public hearing, and the record is kept for clarity and understanding and for archival purposes. This is be called to order. The applicant gets the opportunity to speak first to the application. Then council gets a chance to ask answers from the applicant. Then all those that are in favor of the proposed changes have the opportunity to speak. And again, council gets to ask the presenter any questions for clarity and understanding. All those that are not in favor of the proposed amendment has the opportunity to speak after that. And again, council gets the right to ask questions and comments regarding those points, just for clarity. After that, then anybody that wants to make a general comment is able to. And again, council gets the opportunity to ask questions for clarity and understanding. Okay. Everybody has 5 minutes to speak when they're up to the table, and please address all the remarks through me as the chair. And I will direct the questions to the appropriate staff members and to the members of council. So with that, I will call to order the public hearing of 2651 LUO/21 Land Use Bylaw for Cannabis Amendment. Go ahead, administration.
Council will notice during the meeting this evening, just for numbers within the council chambers, our staff will be switching in and out depending on the item. So I believe we're ready to go, or we're close to ready to go, so there might be a bit of a delay as we kind of get the computer set up and switch everything over. So.
Thank you. My name is Miles Dibble. I'm the Manager of Planning and Development of the Town of Stony Plain, and we're here to present the Cannabis Land Use Bylaw Amendment 2651 LUO 21. This is the public hearing presentation. This bylaw was brought to council based on the conversation that took place during an earlier in this year when we talked about the LUB update, the administrative update. And at that time, the discussion was to align our regulations to the provincial standards. To do so, you can see here, we have the provincial regulations, 100 meters from schools and provincial healthcare facilities, and the 3 different regulations that pertain to the town, which is a 200 meter to schools and provincial health regulations, the 100 meters from public playgrounds, and 150 meters, and these are all in regards to cannabis retail sites. The proposed amendment would change our cannabis retail regulations to just the 100 meters from schools and provincial regulations to bring alignment between us and the provincial regulations. This map here was shown earlier at the first reading, where we present the current areas that are restricted from cannabis retail locations and stores due to their location to other playgrounds, healthcare facilities, schools, and other retail locations. As requested by council, we have shown here what the proposed changes would be to the setback areas. In terms of gross area, the area here is approximately 425 hectares worth of land that are limited for cannabis retail sites. And the new area is approximately 143. This is a reduction of 282 hectares that would be now eligible for cannabis retail sites, considering there's appropriate zoning there. In terms of our advertisements, it's been advertised in the paper twice, and we've posted it on our website. For the public hearing, we've received no written comments, and we'll see if there's people to talk here in the gallery. Again, the first reading took place on August 16th, and today, September 27th, we're looking to do the public hearing and give council potential to do second and third reading. With that concludes my presentation. If there's any questions or comments, I'm available. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Members of council, any questions regarding the presentation? See none. Move on to the next phase, which is all those that are present that would like to speak in favor of the proposed amendment. Is he able to speak up now? Okay. All those in favor of the proposed amendment? Okay. See none. Move on to the next one, which is all those that are proposed that are against the proposal can speak up now. All those that are not in favor of the proposed amendment can speak up. See nobody has stepped up. Move on to the next phase, which is allows anybody that has a general comment regarding the proposed amendment can speak up now. Anyone has a general comment regarding the proposed amendment? See none, that ends that phase. Moving back to administration. Does anyone want to make a general comment after? Closing comments?
No, thank you, Your Worship.
Okay. To administration, has that followed our public hearing procedures and bylaws?
Good evening, Your Worship, members of council. Yes, we have followed all of our procedures with respect to public hearings this evening.
Thank you. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'll call this public hearing to a close. Again, this will be dealt with in the business items a little bit later on this evening. Okay. Okay, moving on to our agenda is number 6, which is the adoption of council minutes. 6.1. Councillor Matthews, please.
The Town Council approved the regular council meeting minutes of September 13th, 2021 as presented.
Thank you very much, Councillor Matthews. Members of council, you had a chance to look through it. Any errors or omissions on the minutes? I didn't see any either, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Okay. And that is passed. Moving on to 7.1, which is council boards and committee minutes. And we have 3 minutes. We have 4 minutes from the Stony Plain Library. Deputy Mayor?
Yes, thank you. The Town Council received the Stony Plain Public Library meeting minutes for information.
Okay. Thank you. Members of council, you had the opportunity to read through the minutes. Any questions, comments regarding those minutes to our council appointed representative? I just have one question to the representative. I just wanted to check to see how the overall move was from the old location to the new location and how our staff finding the facilities in terms of usership, residents being able to access it.
So far, through you, I guess, through you to you, COVID restrictions have, of course, affected our ability to hold any type of grand opening, and generally speaking, attendance or use of the library is still down a bit. But certainly not being able to have a big fanfare open up, we do suspect has affected the public's awareness. And so the board is looking at ways of reaching out and improving our public relations in an attempt to sort of address that issue. But overall, next to working out a few kinks, one of them being large windows let a lot of sun in. We had a lot of hot staff member there for a while, but that seems to be resolved, and I think everybody enjoys the new facility.
Thank you, Richard, for that input. Appreciate that. Okay. Councillor Matthews, go ahead.
I just have one question for the representative. Have the numbers increased in the library, numbers of people that are using it? Are you finding, just through COVID and now, are you seeing the improvement now?
The library was fairly active with curbside pickup and the like, but no, generally the amount of people coming through the door is still down. But they didn't see quite the drop off. They still did provide services throughout.
Thank you. Councillor Pletchko?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship, through to Council Representative. A couple of questions, actually. One is regarding the heating in the main part of the library. You talk about excessive heating in the main part. I'm wondering what was done to improve that for the staff that are there.
I do believe they, through you to fellow councillor, I believe there was some shading that was done, as well as some upgrades. Actually, you know what? That might be a best question left to our general manager. I'm not sure exactly how that was addressed. But I don't see our Community and Protective Services manager present, so I can get back to you on that with a better answer.
Okay,
Follow up through an email would be appropriate.
Yep. And the second question, if you don't mind, is through to the council representative again. Capital campaign. I'm just wondering if you could give us a bit of an update. I see there's some activities that were planned for it, and I'm just wondering how those activities are going for that project.
So just an update to all of council. The contractor that we had originally working on the capital campaign ran into, well, it was hard to raise funds during COVID. And then just more recently, he has given us notice. So we've had to go out to an RFP for a new manager of the capital campaign. It is kind of stalled at the moment in that regards.
Thank you.
Of our general manager of community protective services work with the council member on the committee to get a response provided for questions about internal changes, designs, and so on, and we can get that out via emails.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Seeing none, the call question. All those in favor to accept for information? And that's carried. Okay. Moving on to number 8, which is bylaws. This is the bylaw of 2.651, LUO/21. We just recently just had a public hearing on that. Go ahead, administration.
Thank you, Your Worship. Given the presentation that we gave during the public hearing, administration has no further information to add. If anyone on council has any questions, we're here to address those. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I just have maybe a question. I received, when this was being circulated to the community, I received 2 emails in support of the changes. Have administration received any from feedback from our public or anybody else that was aware of the proposed changes?
Your Worship, administration has not received any written comments to my knowledge for the public hearing. So unless there was something that came through in other means that I'm not aware of, no, we have not.
Okay, thank you. Members of council, any other questions, comments to administration? Okay, see none. I have a question for administration. In terms of the bylaw, was initiated a little while ago when cannabis was being legalized. Council took a cautious approach to make sure that we all kind of understood what's going on and how that would affect our community. In terms of enforcement, has there been issues of enforcement, increases of concern from residents regarding the cannabis in our community?
Nothing substantial to my knowledge, Your Worship.
Okay, so nothing substantial?
I haven't talked to our enforcement specifically on the issue, but I am not aware of any conversations leading to any concerns. Again, from a planning and development standpoint, the only, I guess, item of merit would be when new locations are trying to be located, there's often been a conflict with the 150-meter separation between them. And then in terms of, again, what was talked about previously was the childcare facilities, specifically preschools, having to be a proximity away from them has also been of conflict. Other than those 2 examples, I'm not aware of any problems.
Comment briefly on enforcement or challenges that way. And Your Worship, I would characterize it that, I know there was this council that was present when this came through originally, and at that point there was a good deal of uncertainty or potentially apprehension, not just in, Stony Plain, but in a number of communities about what some of that specific outcomes would be. And I think, Your Worship, I would best characterize it that, we kept our eyes open and we were watching for that or being aware of it and so on. But frankly, Your Worship, I don't know that our enforcement actions had to spike or be doubled, so to speak, to manage this particular aspect of legalization of cannabis. I think, again, council is likely aware that there were some changes to driving while impaired and so on and so forth. And I can't speak directly to that, but I would say from municipal bylaw enforcement, I don't know that it was anything that matched what some of the concerns were, frankly.
Thank you. And see no more questions, comments? Councillor Laurie, for a motion, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll move the Town Council give second reading to bylaw 2651/LUO/21.
Thank you, Councillor Laurie. Members of council, I'll open up for the floor for debate and questions and comments regarding this approval of second reading. Any questions, comments? Okay. I will support the second reading. I think this is a good approach. Again, as I mentioned earlier, council, when this first came up, we took a little more cautious approach to make sure that we were securing our community and the safety of our community. This has been a little over a year now, and as we've seen and heard, there hasn't been very many issues, and so this is the appropriate time for council to make those adjustments to change the zoning and then bring it back within the 100 meters within the provincial guidelines. So I'll call the question. All those in favor? Okay, and that is carried. Councillor Loy for third reading, please.
Yes, Your Worship. The Town Council give third reading to bylaw 2651/LUO/21.
Thank you very much. Administration, anything else to say?
We did receive information from the General Manager of Community Protective Services that the peace officers have little to no files on cannabis, just as a quick update. Other than that, no, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you for the updates and appreciate the General Manager definitely participating online, so it is nice to have that coming through. Okay. Any last questions, comments? Councillor Laurie, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just a quick question of clarity that's just popped into my mind. As you look at the map, when it looks at the 100-meter buffer, I'm just wondering, and I believe this was actually part of a conversation when we originally set the bylaws, is the 100-meter buffer from the property line or is the 100-meter buffer from the building? So for instance, the Westview Health Center, if you look at the map, it's showing the entire property of Westview Health Center as the public or private education service provincial health facilities, and then the 100-meter hash buffer goes outside of the property line. And I'm just curious for clarity, given the fact that the building footprint is significantly smaller than the property, if the 100 meters is from the property building or if 100 meters is from the property line.
Bear with me while I look up the information. I'm not familiar with the details on that aspect right now.
Okay, we'll just wait for that. Any other questions in between time while we wait for the answer? I think this question was asked during the first round of deliberations regarding cannabis in the community. And if I recall, I think it is because we argued and commented if it was from door to door or from the edge of the property line to the edge of the next property line. And in terms of the edge of the property lines, we don't have that information always at hand, but we actually have the lot sizes at hand. So reading the information from Alberta Health Services and the provincial government and the federal government that legalized it, we were using the full property because it was easier for us to mark and actually draw that radius instead of breaking every facility down to actually where it sits on the property and then going from there. And then we'll also run into the problem because if we used it from the property to another property, what if, for example, you mentioned Westview Health Services, there is quite a bit of property there for expansion and development. So does that prevent them from expanding development because we have somebody within that 100 meters? So I think.
Thank you for the time, Your Worship. So the separation distance will be measured from the closest point of any site being used for public or private education services. So again, it is the site from that point, and it is measured to the closest point of the primary access to the retail unit in the building in which the cannabis retail sales would be, not measured from the boundary. So a little bit complex here, but in terms of the school site or the healthcare facility, it's from the site of that facility. But in terms of the actual cannabis retail unit, it's from the edge of that unit or the component of the building the cannabis retail store is within.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. And thank you to the manager for the clarification. And I do think that is important because as we see, several of our sites that contain CRUs are rather large sites. And so there may be a CRU on the property that is outside that 100 meters. And so it's good to know, as your comments, Mr. Mayor, about the facility, because the health facility could expand. So using the property line on that facility makes sense, but then using the closest point of access on the actual retail site makes sense as well. So I really appreciate the clarification on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions, comments, and debate on third reading? Okay. See none. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Okay, and that is passed. That ends our bylaws. Moving on to business items. Moving on to 9.1, which is now the Regional Agricultural Master Plan update. Go ahead, Administration.
Worship. The Regional Agricultural Master Plan has been approved by the Edmonton Metropolitan Regional Board August 12th, 2021. It specifies the reduction of agricultural fragmentation and other forms of agricultural to support the growth of the industry and the stability of the industry in the Edmonton area. As part of this work, the GOA, or the Government of Alberta, does still need to approve to finalize the work. In terms of its implications on the municipality, it would require us to do an agricultural context statement. This is similar to an earlier regional context statement for the municipal development plan that was done several years ago for just a general update to the growth plan. This would have to be done within 1 year of the final adoption by the province. Our municipal development plan would also have to be updated within 2 years of the Government of Alberta's adoption. And the two other things that would be done is an urban agricultural plan would be needed to be done within 2 years, and monitoring and reporting requirements for agricultural related statistics would need to be done. In order to do the urban agricultural master plan, the town has actually already hired a graduate student, and we're currently working towards doing an urban agricultural plan over the next 8 months with this graduate student, and we look forward to bringing it to you at a later date. That concludes the presentation we have for the regional agricultural master plan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Members of Council, any questions, comments regarding the presentation? Okay. Councillor Meyer, Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just a comment from my contacts in the county. They voiced the opinion that this was a very important plan that needed to be done, and it's at least from the contacts I have, well received and appreciated.
Thank you for your comments, Deputy Mayor. Any other questions, comments? Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to add to what Deputy Mayor just said. It was a very necessary plan, and I think often people think, oh, we live in Stony Plain. We're not affected by the farming community, and that's a totally false perception. Our economy here in Stony Plain has always been related to our rural neighbors and the products they produce. Many of our businesses right here in Stony Plain are products that come from the rural area, and I was very pleased to see this plan come not only to Stony Plain but to the whole region. In the past, I'll just pick on our largest neighbor. Edmonton was expanding more and more and more into our farmland, and I won't even think about what other communities have done. But this is a great opportunity to get hold of the idea that our land is a finite resource. And if we keep using it without thinking about repercussions, we're going to lose something that is so valuable. And so, Mr. Mayor, I applaud you on the Edmonton Regional Board for accepting this, and for all the members who worked on this master plan. I think it's so important to keep it foremost in our mind that we are connected to our land, and we need to think about it in all decisions that we make. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, I need a motion. Councillor Plechko.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. The Town Council accept the Regional Agricultural Master Plan update for information.
Okay, thank you very much. Members of Council, questions, comments, and debates on the motion? Okay, seeing none, I just want to provide some comments. I'll be supporting the motion to accept for information. As mentioned by the previous speakers, Deputy Mayor and Councillor Bennett, this has been a long-awaited plan coming forward from the counties that surround us. I think, as mentioned, there is only so much land that we have available, and we need to be good stewards of that land. Quite a few years ago, the town of Stony Plain rezoned and rejigged some of their land use planning, and we took away some land that was zoned commercial in the far northwest corners of the community, which did not make sense. It was not contiguous development. It was going to be a stretch on our resources if anything built there. So we decided to pull it in to make sure that when we have growth in a community, it is done in a sustainable fashion, contiguous to the next subdivisions, so that we have time for infrastructure to grow instead of leapfrogging subdivisions, which costs us a lot of money to support and to supply those services to the residents. I look forward to the urban agriculture plan that's going to be coming forward within the next 2 years. I think on this council, we talked many times about urban agriculture and how that's going to help our community in terms of food security, maximizing the land, the green space that we do have, the land that we have in front of our houses and behind our houses, to make sure that we are working within our community to provide the best resources for our community, our residents, and even nature in our communities as well. So I look forward to seeing that from administration. Just to clarify, you said that we have hired a graduate student to help us with that?
That is correct, Your Worship. There's a program called the Adaptive Resiliency Training Program through the U of A, sponsored by a couple other government departments. And through that, it allows a graduate student to do work related to a variety of topics, including agriculture. So we've utilized that to have a graduate student focus their project work on this.
Good. I look forward to hearing that report. Okay. With that, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Okay. And that is carried. Thank you, administration. Moving on to 9.2, which is the Trans-Alto Tri-Leisure Center 2022 budget. Okay. So council, we've already had a presentation on that. I don't think we need another recap from administration. So I'll just ask Deputy Mayor Meyer to make the motion.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. The Town Council accept the Trans-Alto Tri-Leisure Center 2022 budget operating budget report for information.
Okay. Members of council, we've seen the presentation. We see what the numbers are. Any questions, comments, and debate on the motion to accept for information? Okay. Go ahead, Councillor Laurie.
Thank you, Your Worship. I guess maybe a question of clarity to administration in respect to the reserves that the Tri-Leisure carries. We heard from the general manager that the spirit and the intent they don't believe is that the Tri-Leisure should be carrying reserves. Because the facility is municipally funded through the 3 municipalities, in theory, any of the monies that are sitting in a reserve account at the Tri-Leisure could alternatively be used at other areas within the 3 municipalities to which have ownership stake to help with needs, urgent, emergent, that we have here. And so I'm curious if I can get our administration's perspective on the TLC continuing to carry a restricted reserve account and whether they feel that that's appropriate or whether we feel that that is something that should be revisited and that municipalities should consider holding reserve within our own. That would be for all recreation facilities and not just the Tri-Leisure specifically.
Administration, go ahead.
Your Worship, members of council, and through you, Councillor Laurie. Certainly that question has come up several times throughout the life of the TLC in terms of previous MOU revisits. Appreciate the general manager's comments with respect to having some money in reserve. Certainly does help them bridge the gap if something does come up throughout the season that we're not privy to. The last 2 years of operating has been very challenging for them. The loss in revenues, they did come back and we did use that reserve allocation to assist them in meeting their budget requirements. So if we do deplete those reserves down to zero, which has not been done in the past, years like the 2 COVID years that we've currently had makes it fairly difficult for them, and they would be coming back to council, and we would, out of our own budget and out of our own budget cycle, approved budget, have to come to council and ask for additional funds to support any deficit that they may incur at their facility throughout an operating year. Certainly, the desire was to have some reserve allocation, and we did create 2 reserves specific, so that does, in theory, suggest that there is some contemplation to the positive of carrying some level of reserve. Otherwise, the MOU would have probably had some statement that said the reserve allocation would be dedicated in a different manner with respect to not operating and their surplus reserve. So I believe it's a question that we've contemplated several times. The MOU is looking to be, we continue to look at that document and continue to bring back improvements and debate to the 3 councils with respect to what should or should not be in there. Financial seems to come up from time to time when we continue to land on very minimal improvements to the statements or around the reserves. So certainly something we can revisit in the next rewrite or the next revision of that particular document, and provide some options for consideration to the board and to our own selves with respect to that conversation.
Councilor Bennett, do you want to respond to that as the council appointee?
Did our town manager want to speak before me? He might have some of the information that I was going to.
Go ahead, Tom.
Thank you, Worship. No, I was just going to add a couple of comments just into the general, I guess, dialogue, if you want to call it that, as opposed to a direct answer. But I would say that, I mean, this is a question that comes up periodically in the relationship between the TLC and the 3 municipalities. You know, in the past, I think it's been an effort of call it, you know, I mean, balance or you know, some form of cohesion. What is there a number? What number would be close or right? I think in the dialogues I've been a part of, it's, you know, I don't know that there was ever agreement that the TLC should have, you know, what would be considered a substantial amount of money sitting in reserves. Like in this instance, as from the numbers you heard this evening, you know, I mean, $2 million, $3 million. Like I know that's never been part of the dialogue, but there has been some conversation, as the GM said, you know, that, you know, there is an amount that would, you know, keep from, you know, something goes really wrong and keep from a surprise to all 3 municipalities in the middle of the year. Again, you know, you could also have those reserves sitting in here. This is the other side of it, if you want to put it that way, Worship. I'm editorializing a little bit, but on the other side of that, you know, you could have those sitting in the municipality's bank, so to speak, as the reserves there, and it would be, you know, restricted and ready for, you know, those eventualities. So, Your Worship, if you can give us a little more leeway here, I'm just going to look to see if our GM of Corporate Services has anything that she'd like to add when it talks about restrictions or restricted or reserves with the TLC.
Your Worship and all of Council, I think it's a good discussion, and I think, as you can see with the try this year, having a lot of unpredictability and uncertainty around their financials, you know, it's a very timely conversation. I think it's, you know, the GM of Protective Services is correct in that there's been some discussion as to how those reserves are defined. And I would continue to encourage the TLC to set a policy to better define that so it's clear to all the municipalities. Town manager is correct. You know, there's argument as to whether the municipality would hold those or the TRI. I guess the advantage of the TRI holding those funds is that you know that they're there. You're not, you know, it's not so much tracking of everybody keeping track and holding some within their own. And then the last comment I would make is just around asset management and understanding what that facility needs into the future and the longer term, and then looking at what's sitting in the reserves and how far are we out, because that'll, you know, as the facility gets older, it'll be more important to have dollars there as those larger capital items come forward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I just wanted to give a little bit more information. it was my understanding that quite a bit of that money in the reserve is not something that has been in there for years and years and years. It has been budgets that have come in below cost, and the lighting that we just completed was one of the projects, and of course the reason that the lighting was less expensive is because nobody was in the Tri-Leisure Center, so they could go ahead and do all the work and get it done very efficiently. And there have been other plans such as that. Every year we close the swimming pool down in order to maintain it, to clean it, to get that all organized. Well, this year, you know, it just happened that we were able to do that during one of the lockdowns, and so that saved a little bit of money. So I would really, really question why we are asking questions about reserves that our organizations that we fund have. Especially with the Tri, because there are 3 owners. Every time they have a capital issue or an emergency, and I jotted down a couple. A few years ago, it was the parking lot at the Tri-Leisure Center that all of a sudden the city of Spruce Grove wasn't going to do, and it needed to be done. So for them to then go back to each municipality, and we all know what that entails often when we're dealing with partners. And another example I came up was the air handling unit. When things like that go down, they have to be able to fix it or they're going to lose revenue. So if they have the money in a reserve, good on them. And you can see that they are using that reserve to offset the cost to the municipality in this particular instance. Many of our organizations, I dare say, are surviving all of this because they have, over the years, accumulated a reserve. I don't see anything wrong with that. They're not out there spending it willy-nilly. They're saving it for emergencies. And for the longest time, I could not imagine an emergency that would need to have, I believe it's 6 months in advance to run without, without income coming in. And now, COVID has opened my eyes. Emergencies happen, and we need those reserves. And I would just urge the new council not to punish organizations that we fund for holding money in reserve. I think it saves us, municipalities, money in the long run.
Before I go back to you, Councilor Laurie, for your second question, I do support the TLC holding reserves, but my question was how much is appropriate? That has, if they held $2 million, is that appropriate? Because that's $2 million from the 3 municipalities that have contributed over contributions to capital projects, to operating costs, to recovery costs of them operating utilities and all that stuff. So that means our taxpayers, we all own it anyways, but we've had to increase those taxes to provide that. So if there was, I was thinking the general manager mentioned a policy around that. We figured out what the average big ticket item is, then that's what they should hold, right? And then as a municipality, we can now decide if we want to do our own financial planning to say, we want to put some money aside for a TLC reserve in terms of replacement costs, like we have for many of our other own town facilities. And then we hold that reserve so that there is more accountability for the town of Stony Plain versus having all at the TLC.
That I'll comment on there is what I previously said was this money in the reserve has not been sitting there for years and years. It is some of that money, and I can't tell you off the top of my head how much, but some of it has been saved because of low, capital projects coming in below below the estimate. So it's not as if they've been hoarding money for the last whatever. And so that's the only comment I'll make, because the rest of it, of course, Mr. Mayor, it makes sense, but I'll just say that it's always good to have a backup in your own bank account.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Stony?
And there were some great points raised, and many of them I do agree with. And I can say that as a former member who sat on there, during my time on there, that reserve was up to over $1.5 million. And the money had been in there for a while. Definitely it ebbs and flows with various projects, and a lot of that money does come in from the savings of the projects. What was brought up, as Councillor Bennett mentioned, was about the TLC not needing to come back to the municipalities. However, in their policies and in the MOU on their restricted reserve, they do. They have to come back to each one of the 3 municipalities to request authorization to use that reserve. So whether they're using that money from their own reserve account or whether they're using that money from a town reserve account, to me is irrelevant, because they still need to come back to the municipalities. Now, in speaking about the reserve, if we did have a specific number on a reserve fund that we allowed the Tri-Leisure to keep that was unrestricted, that did not require them to come back to the municipalities so that they could be nimble in the face of an emergent situation, totally different conversation, and I'd be more than happy to have that conversation. But what I'm worried about is we have our own facilities that are strictly under the requirement of the town of Stony Plain. So whether that's the golf course, whether it's our outdoor rinks, whether it's capital for our outdoor pool, whether it's the Glen Hall Arena or potential future recreation center that we don't know whether it will be regional or whether it will be solely Stony Plain's responsibility, it is important for the town of Stony Plain to have appropriate reserves to be nimble and to action any emergent needs that may come from any of our recreation facilities, not just one. I am not stating that we should take money away from reserves, spend it elsewhere, and not put money back into reserve for the facilities, but I do feel that we, as the town of Stony Plain, need to be responsible for our tax dollars, and we should be looking at our reserves for all of our recreation facilities under one umbrella, not a reserve for this facility, this facility, this facility, and that facility. And so again, if we're looking at giving the Tri-Leisure some autonomy so that they have a certain reserve that can be used without having to come back to the municipal councils, again, I think we heard from our general manager about setting good policies. That would be a great policy for the TLC to set and bring forth to the municipalities in the MOU, so that they could then be reactive and not have to come back to each of those councils. And we as council could agree on a dollar figure that we were comfortable leaving in that specific facility. But when there isn't a number tagged to that, and that reserve could climb to 1.5 to who knows how many millions of dollars, not saying it will happen, but not saying it won't. And so I do think it's important from a financial management perspective and from a policy perspective that we do look at this, that we do scrutinize this, and we do understand not only how it impacts the Tri-Leisure, but how it impacts all of our recreation facilities.
Good. Councilor Mannings?
I just have a quick question. Like, you know, if we start messing around with this reserve policy that's there right now, I mean, we have two other municipalities then that would have to go through and be part of this discussion, and who knows what would end up. And I think that this organization, in the 4 years I've been here, has shown tremendous responsibility in the use of the financial funds. And I do agree, it would be nice for them to have determined a reasonable amount, and that should be adjusted moving forward. So I think there should be a recommendation for them to do that, but that's as far as I would go. So that's just my comments. I would support, you know, what they're doing right now.
Yes, thank you. This is only for information. I think we're just providing some comments so that our representative, when they go back to the board to have those conversations, those comments can be brought back to the table at that time. Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Councillor Bennett. I share much of your opinions. I do just have one question, because I know our reserves we can invest and we get a return on. I'm curious if the Tri-Leisure is able to do that. So through you to administration, I'd put that question.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Meyer, yes, that is correct. I'm not familiar with what they invested in, but I know they do invest those funds and would return earn some return back on them.
Great. Any questions, comments regarding? Okay. So 9.2, to accept for information, I'll call the question. All those in favor? And that is carried. Move on to 9.3, which is the Mayor's Task Force. Actually, it's 6:30, so let's call a recess while staff turn over, and we'll come back in about 8-10 minutes. Okay, members of council, staff, and administration that's watching, and then everybody that's participating online or that's here in person. We're back to our agenda to number 9.3, which is the Mayor's Task Force on Community Resiliency. This is our administrative analysis for information. Go ahead, administration.
Your Worship. A little bit of a backstory or background, so I'll have a few words to say about this most recent task force. Our General Manager of Community and Social Development will speak to this item as well, and then we can certainly answer any questions Council may have. Your Worship, both myself and one of my General Managers sat in these task force meetings for going on whatever it was, almost a year, I think. It was quite a good there. It was Tuesday evenings, I believe. I spent a number of Tuesday evenings as part of these, and Your Worship, I know through the dialogue and in the conversations, it certainly was, even for myself personally, Your Worship, I would add that it did give a bit of light to some of the more challenging times of this past year. The opportunity to hear from, speak to, engage with dedicated community members is certainly always something that's welcome. A little bit more, Your Worship, the report and the analysis is presented. I believe Council certainly has had the time to look at this one, intending for it to be at the last meeting, but there's a sort of a breakdown. I won't go into all of the detail about each of the items, but as you can see, there's sort of a designation of in progress or refer to strategic planning, refer to corporate planning, and community lead, I believe, is the basically the last one. I just wanted to put a little bit of a context on the refer to strategic planning or refer to corporate planning. So for the items that have some reference about corporate planning, we feel that there's some alignment with, or a little clear alignment with previously given strategic direction from Council. Some of the items that say refer to strategic planning, it was felt that there's maybe a bit, some more weigh-in from Council that's needed on some of those topics. There are a couple items within the report, and part of the recommendation are to, come back specifically for Council. They're noted like Q2, I believe, of next year. Those are items, Your Worship, that generally we feel we have a fair amount of information on, that we could just come into the chambers and be a little more direct that way. So, Your Worship, I'll stop there. It's a little bit of context on how they were shifted around. And Your Worship, I'll just turn it over to the General Manager if she can introduce or add further as she sees fit.
Thank you, Town Manager. Your Worship, through you and to the rest of Council. So the task force, as the Town Manager has alluded to, was convened in September 2020 and ran through to June of this year. The goal of looking at resiliency included a definition that the task force adopted, which talked about the capacity to survive, adapt, and grow, no matter what kind of chronic stresses and acute shocks are experienced. What the task force looked at were the stresses and conditions that weaken our community on a reoccurring basis, such as social isolation, unaffordability, or high unemployment. The task force felt that stresses are often symptomatic of systemic and institutional barriers. Shocks are typically considered as sudden onset events, such as pandemics or extreme weather conditions. And while the COVID-19 global pandemic was certainly an example of a shock, both from a social and economic perspective, it illustrated areas where our resilience as a community was challenged. And so what the task force embarked on was an exploration mission, essentially to look through what the impacts of COVID-19 were on the community, but to understand the community, future impacts and future state of community resiliency as we as a community, and that included the public members of the task force, along with the consultation that happened with various organizations and individuals within the municipality. To give consideration to local economics and business vitality, to look at infrastructure stability, social planning and community well-being, community group vibrancy, and aligning with provincial and federal programs and services and supports. The methodology that the task force used was a simple, straightforward one, and they consistently applied it as they met with community groups. So it was to gather information. Presentations from organizations were asked were given a series of questions. They were all asked to respond to all of them. And using that information, the task force was able to identify different issues that were common across the community. They worked to generate possible solutions through brainstorming exercises and further research projects that each task force member was tasked to do, was engaged to do. And through that, they evaluated options, forming their recommendation document, as well as identifying what they considered to be different levels of priority, potential costs, and potential impact on the community. Throughout this, at the end of the day, the report that the task force presented in June included 6 problem statements broken into 3 thematic areas: social, infrastructure, and economic. As part of that process that the task force embarked on, administration moved forward with an analysis of the recommendations. You will see that document beginning on page 173 of your package. And in there, you'll see where administration feels the best fit at this point in time for each of those recommendations are, whether it is a community-led priority or included for discussion in next year's strategic planning process, included in the corporate plan process, and in some cases, things that are already in progress or in process within our existing departments and existing programs and services. So, Your Worship, I'll pause there, and I'm open to questions, as is the town manager.
Thank you. Any questions, comments regarding the presentation? I think if council is aware, we had a presentation a little while ago from the committee task force themselves. We had a chance to ask a couple questions, and now this is coming back as information as the administration has had a chance to review the recommendations brought forward by the task force. Any questions? Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship. And this is more of a comment. So just when council first accepted this report for information, I voted against it because I was uncomfortable with the vast array of proposals put forward. Having administration review and clarify the stages each proposal currently is at, and how other proposals would require further approvals and discussions, I feel more comfortable with this report. Just on that, I would also, I missed the opportunity to thank the task force members for their thorough report at the time, so I'd like to take this time to say thank you to all the members of that task force.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't know if this is the appropriate time. I just wanted to emphasize the fact that there were community members that were part of this task force, which I found most beneficial. And Mr. Mayor, I know that with all the task forces that you have promoted throughout this year and a half, all of them had community members as part of them. And what a benefit that is to have our community being at the table and telling us and giving us feedback and giving us suggestions and ideas. So, Mr. Mayor, first of all, I'd just like to thank you for your leadership in developing those. And second, I hope that that continues. I hope that that is a way that our community sees that they can really participate and be part of progress and going forward. We have a very talented residential base here in Stony Plain. And I was delighted to work with all the ones that I did, and I'm sure that that Councillor Laurie and Deputy Mayor Mayor Meyer would say the same thing about their task force, are the ones that they chaired. So I went through this analysis, and I think that we have a very good beginning of ways to lead our community, to cushion us from any other shocks. I hope that as we go forward, many others will be accepted. I did have another comment. So continue doing the task force or some kind of community engagement where people actually sit down and are part. Oh, that was the process. That was what I was going to suggest. If it's possible for our administration to send out this analysis to our community members. And I just always think that when community comes forward, gives their time, gives their input, it's always beneficial to have them know what has happened to that process. And so I'm hoping that this can be sent out to those members so that they know exactly what administration has looked at. And hopefully tonight we can pass this for information. So just take a note of, and if you could do that, please.
I think that process is pretty simple. Okay. Move on to Councillor Preschool, please.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Well, Judy, you took just about everything I wanted to say. I think the biggest thing that I wanted to make comments was very nice to see administration take this to the next level. I think one of the concerns that we had with this committee was it would get dropped somewhere along the way. We put a lot of time and effort into it. It was about a year-long process and a lot of meetings and a lot of public input. And at the end of the day, there was a few comments that, you know, where does this go from now? This is a clear path of where this can go now, and it gets built back into our community. So thank you to administration for actually taking this report, putting their little story beside each one where they feel this fits within our community. And I encourage you to send this, just like Judy did, I encourage you to send this back out to the members of that task force so they can actually see that this is something that is worth their time. We really do stuff within the community when we're assigned task force, and it's not just a bunch of paperwork and then get lost. So thank you very much to administration. It was a very well-led project. There was an individual on that project that did a phenomenal job for us. He took us by the book and led us all the way through it. So congratulations to everybody that sat on that task force, and thank you, Judy, for doing that as well.
Thank you. Councillor Mattis.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I concur with Councillor Bennett and Councillor Palechko and the comments that they've made. This task force worked very hard for a long period of time to provide recommendations regarding social infrastructure and economic. And with that, because it broadly addresses so many recommendations for our community. One of the recommendations that came forth out of the number of reports that we looked at through resilient communities, that was 100 resilient communities across the world, and a few in Canada that were participating in that, one being Calgary, Vancouver, and I believe it was Montreal participated as well. They had a resilience coordinator to basically facilitate and to keep the ball rolling. And I realize that it's going to be considered in corporate planning moving forward, and I think that's a wonderful idea to really, make sure that this has a force that continues on. The other thing I'd like to mention is with regards to seniors, because that population will grow so much in the next while, when we talk about town programs to enhance age-friendly infrastructure for all ages, that's another area that I do think we need to seriously look at as that population increases in Stony Plain. to make sure that they have the activities and the facilities to work with there. So overall, though, it was a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to just learn so much about some of the things that are happening in the community, and that we were ending up provided with some very good recommendations, I think, to move forward with. So thank you.
Any other questions, comments for administrative staff? Okay, seeing none, Councilor Bennett for the motion, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That Town Council accept the Mayor's Task Force on Community Resiliency Administration Analysis for information.
Thank you. Any questions in the debate on the motion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Okay, that's carried. Okay, move on to 9.4, which is the financial trend report. We'll just give administration a couple minutes to set up. Welcome, go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening, Your Worship and Council. Included in your council package tonight is the 2020 year-end financial trend report. This evening, we will highlight a few important financial indicators and the analytics behind them. Financial condition is the ability for an institution to maintain service levels, withstand economic disruptions, and meet demands. When assessing the town's financial condition, there are some key questions we must ask, such as, can the local government pay for what it is doing now? Are there sufficient reserves or other financial vehicles available for financing emergencies? Is there enough financial flexibility for the government to adjust to change? Inflation is presented as a point of reference and is not reflected in the individual charts. Given the diverse nature of municipal expenses and revenues, applying inflation universally will not provide an accurate representation, and this is better suited as a point of reference. 2020 inflation rate was recorded at 2.1%, as per the Alberta Industrial Product Price Index by Statistics Canada. The report before you has updated population numbers as per the Provincial Office of Statistics of Information. Due to the repealed regulation by the provincial government in 2020 related to the municipal census, these estimates were provided by that group and updated in the report before you. The operations snapshot shows that 2020 revenues were higher than expenses. The increased gap is a result of additional one-time provincial funding received during the pandemic, along with reduced operations during this period. This is a combination of closed facilities, reduced travel, and expense reductions. Prior to 2020, the trend had expenses growing at a faster rate than revenue. This trend going forward is unsustainable and an indication of using reserves to fund expenditures. Operating revenue and expenditures per capita is a related chart that shows the exact pattern. As benchmarked against our comparators listed on page 289 of the council report, Stony Plain has continued to remain above the median in operating expenditures per capita and has been for the past 7 years. The unique circumstances of the comparator municipalities during the pandemic would have a different level of exposure to directly impacted expenses. As a result, the town's move closer to the median in 2020 is not necessarily a sign of long-term adjustment or future trends. In regards to revenue, Stony Plain continued to trend on the lower side of revenue per capita as compared to the comparisons. The main source of revenue for the town is property taxes. Stony Plain has remained at the lower end of the comparative municipalities in terms of property taxes per capita. However, new services have been added throughout the years. Assessment is a key component to property tax revenue and has remained generally flat, with growth offsetting assessment decline. In 2021, Council approved an updated revenue and taxation policy, which will transition the current tax split between residential and non-residential taxes to that of the average of the urban Edmonton Metropolitan Regional Board members. The transition will take place through 2024 and will result in a more sustainable tax base and equitable division of tax share. Reserve balances are another key financial indicator and have continued to experience depletion. Reserves are significantly lower than the median and near the bottom of the range. This is a measure of using reserves at a greater rate than replenishment. Reserve balances is a measure of municipalities saving for the future, for inclement events, or flexibility for unforeseen challenges. Through the Fiscal Sustainability Framework and update and approval of the Unrestricted Surplus Policy in 2021, guidelines for reserve standards and optimal balances have been developed. This policy guides the future of reserves, and the corporate plan will plan for future needs regarding reserves. Long-term debt as a percentage of total assessment spiked in 2018 due to additional debt, but has been on the decline ever since. As part of the Fiscal Sustainability Framework once again, and the updated debt policy in 2020, Council implemented an internal debt limit of 80% of the allowable debt limit, which implies prudent, affordable debt balance. In 2021, a significant debenture was approved by Council, of which will change the trending of this chart before you, and change the town's rating in 2021 to 2.05%. This means the new rating would be a downgrade from AA, which is excellent, to an A, which is good, based on the Global Credit Rating Agency. Future debt limits will continue to be monitored. As we continue through the uncertainty of COVID, economy, and unknown future grant support, these measures become more acute. Council's approval of the Fiscal Sustainability Framework has solidified future guidance regarding a multitude of financial aspects for the town. As we move into 2022 to 2024 corporate planning sessions, these trends will assist in understanding financial condition of the municipality into the future and support administration's recommendations. We'll now ask if you have any questions.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. Members of the council, any questions to administration on the presentation? Councillor Matties, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. We all know that a financial trend report is looking backwards. And I guess my question is, how do we look forward as a community, as a municipality, to see where we're going? Where is it that we want to be? What is the mechanism that allows us to see that on a financial basis? Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Matties and all of Council. That's a great question. So typically future or past trends predict future trends. And through our corporate planning process, we do a significant amount of analysis on our capital plan, for example, is 10 years. We even look further out on that. We look at our reserve balances for the next 10 years and the requirements that are going to be drawn from them. We look at our debt limit and against council's approved internal debt limit and what can we handle. And administration has a lot of conversations before even that document is presented to council in regards to what's prudent and what's affordable for the organization and for the taxpayers as well. So all of that data is analyzed on an ongoing basis and very heavily throughout the corporate planning process.
If I just may follow. So our biggest source of revenue is our taxes. What do we do specifically to project where we want to be 10 years from now for that?
Thank you, through your worship, to Councillor Matties and all of council. We do look at growth trends. We work with our external assessor as well in predictions in future. Obviously, there are many things that we cannot predict, and we're using the best information that we have at the time. However, also, I mean, even the planning department and land use bylaw and all of those sorts of things define the future growth of the town and where we're moving towards, and where the development areas are, and there are projections in regards to the growth of the town in those areas, and that's all developed and looked into the future revenue and the sustainability of the future taxation base, and also the mix. So as council approved the new policy in regards to the tax split, so looking at where residential versus non-residential tax assessment split is and how that tax is applied.
And that is, of course, because I'm concerned that we're not setting kind of a target. Where is it that we want to be as a community moving forward? Looking at it from a financial perspective, like where our revenues, where do we want to be? What is it going to take to get there? And so I know we've done so many things on a financial basis to really keep us on track and budget and make sure that our debt is good and things like that. But I'm not sure if we've looked forward with regards to, and yes, we talk about growth, but what does that mean specifically? How do we get there? And so I just wanted to suggest that because I feel like I'm not clear. I'm not clear where we want to be exactly 10 years from now. And I'd sure like us to have a reasonable growth rate in terms of our assessment, and the reason I'm asking is because I saw a chart just a short while ago that really our property values have not increased that much, over a number of years, and they were, back in 2010 relatively high and quite comparable to what they are today. So the point is, what is our target for that? And I think councils need to know that information.
That's a good comment, Councilor Matties. I think I don't think we can predict what the assessment value is going to be. It's based on the market. I think your question is where we want to be in 10 years and how we're going to get there in terms if our main course of revenue for the town of Stony Plain is through tax base. So if the value of the properties continue to go down and we have a downturn in the housing market, where are we going to make up the difference and how are we going to get there? And if we have a spike in property values, do we get there faster or do we slow things down? I think it's like, how do we get there and how do we get the money? Because if our largest revenue source is from the tax base, how do we predict how much we're going to have year over year so that we can do what we need to do?
I mean, it's like any personal situation that you have. Like you have a target, you know where you're going, and I feel that with the town of Stony Plain, when I look at some of the numbers that we have, that yes, there's been good growth in a number of areas, but in terms of when we start looking at our revenues that are coming in from assessment, I'm concerned that we are maybe not really having our eye on the ball as to a clear determination as to where we want to go to. And when I'm looking at my own personal finances or financials period, I know where I want to get to. And so I work towards that. And I'm sure that you have those answers and stuff yourselves, but I'm not sure that gets communicated sometimes back to us in a fashion that we can see what it is that we need to do in terms of growth of our community.
Okay. I'll actually add to that comment too. And I think that conversation has a lot to do with council. I think it's what our growth rate needs to be in terms. I think the staff need to tell us that when we have our strategic planning, and these are the things that we want to do, they have to provide us with the numbers of, okay, this is the growth rate that you need as a community to achieve that. Right. And then that is brought back to council, and then if we're happy with that, how do we, as a council, incentivize, get builders out here, get houses built? How do we get that growth target rate? And I think that's what you're trying to say. We have a number. How do we get there, right? We can't just let the market go like this because the market goes like this all the time. It's like, if we need it to go here, how do we get it there? And I think that's a large conversation that we need to have as a council. Thank you for bringing that forward and to just making sure that we're top of mind of what, should we have a growth rate? And if we do, what should that be? Councillor Preschool?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Page 296 of 316. In 2015, we removed development contributions. I understand it was for accounting purposes, but to deferred rather than reserves. What was the reason, benefit, and what differentiates the two?
Thank you, through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Palechko and all of Council. So there was a change in accounting standard in that year in regards to off-site levies. So previously, off-site levies were marked as reserves or a part of reserves. And so when those were taken out and moved into deferred revenue, it's just a different way of presenting it. So it looks like the reserves had gone down at that time. So those are the difference.
Thank you.
Okay. I think was there another comment regarding that, because it's a developed contribution, it's actually a liability to the town? Right, so it's not a really reserve, it's actually a liability to the town of Stony Plain.
Correct, thank you, through your worship, to you and all of council. That is a liability to the town, so it was moved to deferred revenue. So deferred revenue means that we have received the revenue but have not earned it. So that revenue is tied to future projects. And once those projects are constructed, then the revenue will come into income.
Thank you. Any other questions of clarity and understanding to our administrative staff? No? Okay. Thank you. That was good questions for administration and kept them on their toes. Councillor Matties for the motion, please.
For information.
Thank you. Members of council, the motion is to accept for information. Any questions, comments, and debate on the motion itself? No. Okay, seeing none, I call the question. All those in favor for information? Okay, that is carried. Thank you. Okay, moving on to 9.5, which is the 2021 tax recovery public auction. I think we do this every year, so go ahead, administration.
Thank you, Your Worship, and all of council. As required by the Municipal Government Act, known as MGA, a municipality must annually prepare a tax arrears list of parcels that have tax arrears in excess of 1 year as of March 31st. Further to this, any property that remains on the list for 2 years must be offered for auction. Prior to the auction process, and as soon as taxes are in arrears, administration works diligently to contact landowners in various forms, including statements, reminder letters, and phone calls before the outstanding amounts are turned over to tax service. Included in this agenda item is the 2021 Tax Recovery Public Auction Reserve Bids and 2021 Public Auction Conditions of Sale. The Public Auction Condition of Sale is a document that is included and outlines the conditions of the sale consistent with the tri-region. All property owners have until the time of the auction to pay their arrears or enter into a tax payment agreement to have the property removed from the auction. The date of the auction for this year has been set for November 26, 2021 at 10 a.m. in the Town Office Council Chambers and will be advertised following today's council approval as per the guidelines in the MGA.
Okay, thank you very much. Members of council, any questions or comments regarding the presentation by administration? Councillor Bennett, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to administration. This is always a sad time when we have to look at what properties the taxes have not been paid. I always feel bad for it. But my question is on the one property that's listed on page, page 311. My question is that one property? Or is that one property but with different housing units on it?
Thank you through your worship to Councillor Bennett and all of council. This is one piece of land. There are no structures on this land.
I'm sorry?
There are no structures on this land.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Laurie?
Thank you, Your Worship. To follow on Councillor Bennett's comments, searching up the address, being that it is in a subdivision that is under development and has had quite the history to it. The listed address is actually currently under a judicial sale, and I'm curious how that impacts the potential property auction. If there's no ownership, if it's under a judicial sale, can the town actually auction that property off if it were to get to that point? I'm not quite familiar with how that would work.
Go ahead.
Through your worship to Councillor Laurie, I would have to look into for sure the details on that. I do know if a property is listed by a realtor that we could still continue to go forward with the public tax auction, but I will get back to that for sure.
Excellent, thank you. I think that's quite important to know. I mean, obviously, if the property is held by an owner and is being sold, that's one thing. But if this property has now entered into a separate legal process where it is being sold under a judicial sale order, I'm guessing that might throw some complication in there. And I'm wondering if maybe, if it is under judicial sale, then if the town needs to ensure that we pursue our options as a claimant against the property so that in the judicial sale process, we would be compensated for the tax arrears.
Go ahead.
Through your worship to Councillor Laurie and all of council, I can comment on that side. So we did register against the title once the property is 1 year in arrears. And so we would be on that list already through the judicial sale.
Excellent, okay. I guess we just have to figure out who has the right to sell it then.
Yes.
You know, that's a good question, and we would look to clarify that. Again, the process, you know, tonight is to make sure that we have council's authority to do so. And I think in past years we've been in here on around this time of the year looking forward, and certain things get resolved and so on and so forth. But you know, based on the complexity of this particular site, I would expect we'll do some due diligence and make sure that we're all within our rights. Again, speaking generally, you know, I mean, tax liens typically fall pretty high on a list of registrations against any property. So I know that, you know, I mean, I can say that confidently in just in experience that we tend to be pretty high on the list of when we have those liens on there. So.
Thank you. Any other questions? Clear your understanding?
Just a further comment.
Councillor, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. And this is actually just a further comment towards administration. I actually just want to commend administration. I think this is the first year since I've sat on council that this list has come forward with only one property on it. And so, although I know it does lag a couple of years, I think it does just go to show the work and the due diligence that is going in to work with property owners to make sure that properties do not end up on this list in finding ways to assist our residents as we've done over the last couple of years with programs. So just a kudos to administration for that.
Okay. Good comments, thank you. Follow up, any questions? See none. Councillor Laurie, the motion, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll move that Town Council approve the terms and conditions of sale for the 2021 public auction as presented and establish the reserve bids as presented for properties being offered for sale at the 2021 public auction.
Thank you very much. Members of council, any questions in the debate on the motion on hand? See none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you, administration. And moving on to information items from council discussion. This is the time that council can provide updates to members of council and to administration. Councillor Loy, I'll start with you.
Worship, and I don't have anything this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bennett.
Funny thing, I don't think I have anything to add this evening. You better mark
Deputy Mayor.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Just 2 quick points. Out and about, I've noticed there's a couple blinking lights. One street light on Golf Course Road in front of the Maple Leaf development, as well as one of the bollards on Main Street in front of the post office.
Yes. I think one of the bullets is flashing and one of them is off. I think that was, I brought that forward before, and I think, when do we expect that getting done by the contractors?
No, I did receive a message from a member of the public about the bollards downtown, and we can certainly check into the streetlight mentioned. And I know sometimes this question gets asked often. We can certainly pass those requests over to Fortis, but for members of the public too, just a general reminder that Fortis you can report that online and phone into Fortis and so on and so forth. But we get a lot of those, and we don't mind passing them on ourselves. So.
Thank you for that. I would just jokingly say maybe we can just leave that blinking light on in front of the Maple Leafs home. It kind of has a nice eerie sort of Halloween feel to it all. We could just leave that until after Halloween.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councilor Pletchko, go ahead.
You had to look to see who I was?
Not to see if I wanted to jump you and go over.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to thank two of our councillors that I didn't get a chance to last council meeting. Both of them have now made it official that they will not be on council, and that's Councillor Loy and Councillor Bennett. I want to go as far as say that having been on council for a first term, the mentorship and leadership that the two of you showed us as individual councillors is phenomenal. The hose that we drink from is something that you can only imagine. Having zero experience, coming onto this council is almost unthinkable. Your guidance and leadership has taken us to new levels. This town did not stop in what it was doing. This town continued to grow. And I think that you helped us do that by giving us that leadership and guidance. You will be duly missed here. I have spent a bit of time on the street, and I know our residents will duly miss both of you. I thank you both very much from the bottom of my heart. And even though we agree to disagree at times, I think we have all learned to be much better people at the table that we are today. So going forward, when you're out and about and you're hearing things, hoping that there's a few of us back on council, you should be in contact with those people, letting them know what the residents are still wanting, because I truly believe that you're not moving away from a position on council, you're moving into the community, and you will be a voice and ear for that for a long time. So thank you very much. On a little bit harder note, what's going on at Somerville? I see there's some lights. I see there appears to be somebody that moved into one of the units there. There's a car parked there on a fairly regular basis. And I do see at the far end, maybe somebody on the judicial side of it trying to clean up a little bit of what the weed mess is that's over there. So do we have any, by chance, an update on Somerville?
Your Worship, I could certainly make a few comments there. So I think I'll try to cover the front to back or the back to front. I heard you say weed notice or cleanup. I know that we had issued some notices that way, and that we were getting some compliance. It was just part of the update this morning with staff was that it looked like there was some compliance happening on that end. So we would expect that to continue as part of that process. Point blank question about people staying there, living there. They should not be. There's been no occupancy permits issued on those properties. So I'll just say that there should not be anybody occupying legally, I guess I would say, on those. There's been no occupancy permits issued. Now to get into I'll use the term rehabilitation. So council is aware that for a number of years we've been back and forth with the two owners about how to bring those units up to a level of safety that could allow for occupancy. That's been our basic back and forth through engineering reports and subsequent reviews and so on and so forth at an administrative level to get to a point where we would be comfortable signing off to allow work to continue. What I will say on that note, Your Worship, and to the rest of Council, is that I believe it was about last week, after, again, quite a bit of back and forth, we've reached a point where we are generally satisfied with what is being proposed and the manner of which they would retrofit may not be exactly the right word, but the engineering solutions to make sure those are safely inhabitable down the road. And I believe they are moving forward with that, the last I had heard. So I think I'll stop there, Your Worship, if that answered the few questions, or if there's anything further that I can either answer now or provide Council with a further update on that particular site question.
Okay. Councilor Pledge, anything else?
Just a bit of a comment. I'm not 100% sure somebody's living in there. It appeared that suite that they had from before where I think it was a surveillance suite.
Yeah.
It appeared the last few times that I've been there, there's a light on side, there's a car parked outside. So maybe a bit of an assumption on my part, but maybe something just to be cautious about as well. So
yeah, we can check into that. But the other I guess basic comment is that you will members of council, members of the communities will see what I would expect to be more action, if you want to call it that, more construction taking place or refitting over the next little while. And again, going back now a few years ago, I know the commitment both from council and from administration was to ensure that anything happening on that site would be up to code, would be the safety of any potential resident would be the number one goal of what happens out there. Again, due diligence both to staff upstairs in planning and infrastructure and some of our consulting engineering firms that we work with, we've been able to arrive at a point where we feel the proposed solutions will achieve that.
thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Mannies?
Your Worship, I first of all want to thank Councillor Pleshko for saying on behalf of all of us what we would have said to both of you, that we thank you so much for your dedication for many, many years to this council and to this community. I know that you will continue in your journeys, whether that's in your individual lives or in participation in whatever activities that you choose to in Stony Plain and in this region. So I sure appreciate you both being here, and I appreciate so much of the guidance that you've provided all of us as well. I do have a few questions. First of all is with regards to the 3-stop at Bright Bank. Is there an update on that for us?
Yeah, Your Worship. So again, just in a maybe quick background in general, the town received inquiry and commentary about from some local residents in the Bright Bank Oatway area about the 3-way stop. So what we have done. Staff did some traffic counts. They've done some, analysis and so on. And I have received that. It was my intent to reach out to the individual that provided the original request or what have you, and let her know where we're at and what we would foresee doing. Your Worship, I guess I would say, part of the contemplation there will be, should the town wish to change anything, the method of implementation. I think, in the past, the recent past, I think, and I would credit our staff upstairs for some of this. We've gotten a bit more, what I would like to say or like to call a little more proactive on sending out some communication in advance of some of those changes and asking for any further comments. And so I guess right now, right here, I don't know that I will say which way the recommendation went internally and what the ultimate decision will be. But I will say that should we look to change anything, we would do our best to communicate that in advance and seek a little bit further input from the community in that area. I'll stop there, Your Worship. Certainly can answer any follow-up questions or whatever.
Just the one follow-up question, and I have a couple of more comments, but when will we receive that information?
Your Worship, again, it sort of hit my desk, sort of Thursday, Friday, so I would intend to take a look at that. Again, reach out to the original submitter, sorry, and have a bit of a dialogue with that. And I would expect to be able to update council, no later than, the end of this week would be the ultimate latest. So,
thank you very much. I also wanted to share that Sister Susan contacted Gary Webster, our operations supervisor, and she was wondering if the town waters the new trees in Stony Plain that are planted. And she said because she was watering all the trees that we planted with Councillor Plechko and I, with the Catholic Women's Church, we planted this spring, and she was watering them this year. And she was wondering if the town would be able to do that. And he said, well, the town normally doesn't do that. So she was calling me. But as she was calling me, she was looking out her window and she saw the town's truck watering the trees. So she was very, very pleased that, Gary Webster stepped up and did this. And I'm really very, very happy about that because it's a natural area that is so important for our community, and we definitely need our trees. She also mentioned that she had a great new idea, and that she had been reading in Edmonton and other communities that they have goats and sheep that are cutting the grass. And she said, and I said, I know that's a great idea, but it's not all that new because Councillor Bennett's been telling us every year we should be doing that. So anyways, but I told her that I would definitely bring that to council's attention again. She said it would be a much lower cost to get a sheep herder than to have that big machine maintained and capital expenditures in the future. So she's just wondering if we would consider it.
Your Worship, I'll say yes. I know our friends over in Fort Saskatchewan have something pretty similar, and based on some of the earlier conversation about a few of our councillors are retiring, there may be some open time for shepherds to put their name forward to the town.
Say that again. Can hear you loudly.
There may be some opportunity for some of our retiring councillors to apply as shepherds for the town of Stony Plain.
Well.
Anything else, Councillor Matthews? Anything else? Councillor Laurie?
Thank you, Your Worship. I do have a few things tonight. First and foremost, I just want to start with a kudos for administration on the backflow preventer program that was announced and launched today. I know that's just one small step in the flood mitigation planning that we've been working on, but I think it's a very important one to residents to show that we're continuing to look at different ways that we can help them out, and obviously understanding that a financial burden isn't always the easiest thing for a resident to absorb. Having that program in place is a huge benefit. Also, kudos to our administration on the provision of free transit on Election Day, October 18th. I did just have one question around that. I don't remember the exact hours of our polls off the top of my head, but our current transit setup on that route certainly does not run for the entirety of those hours, and I'm wondering if there's any expanded hours or service on that day from the transit system.
Thank you, Your Worship, through to Councillor Laurie and all of Council. It's something that I would have to get back to you on, or we could get back to you on. So the voting hours, our voting stations are open 9 a.m. till 8 p.m. on Election Day. The hours of the transit system is something I'm not familiar with off the top of my head, so I would have to get back to you on that one.
Okay, thank you. I'd love some consideration on that, and in particular, maybe even a little bit of route adjustment or something along those lines for that day to make sure that it stops at both polling stations. Currently, the route only stops at one of the polling stations and is a couple blocks away from the second polling station, just due to the roading. And then again, particularly on the off hours, because understanding that's still a work day for people, so having our transit system running its normal route is great, but potentially having that on the hours that it wouldn't be running the route, even as a, what's the word I'm looking for, on demand or something like that, where a resident could call a specific number and the bus would be able to collect them, deliver them to the voting station, and then vice versa as well. So I appreciate looking at that. Question for administration around Stony Plain Central School. Taking a look at the property, there hasn't been a lot of changes there, and I've come to understand that it sounds like there is a delay in delivery of structural steel. I'm just wondering if we have any type of an update from Parkland School Division on how much of a delay that will be on the facility, and if that will impact its ability to be ready for the next calendar school year.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, to Councillor Laurie and the rest of Council. I guess the short answer is no, I'm not aware of anything specific. I didn't receive any specific update from PSD regarding that. So the next thing would be, I can certainly reach out to my counterpart and find out if there's anything of note that we should be aware of or we need to be aware of regarding the construction timelines there, and be able to pass that along to Council as it comes in.
Thank you. Next on my list is the curling rink cleanup. The site has sat in its current state for a pretty significant period of time since the devastating fire that the rink experienced. I understand that the investigation and everything has been completed, and I did ask a while ago about the cleanup and got the impression that the work had been tendered and awarded and it would begin very quickly. That was some time ago. And so I have not seen that work commence, and so I'm wondering if we have any idea when that work will commence. And then I also had a question from a resident that I wasn't sure of. Is the town of Stony Plain responsible for the cost of the security around the facility, or is that being borne by the insurance and the curling club?
Your Worship, through the Councillor Laurie. So did receive an update today from the curling club. There is asbestos in that particular site, so it's Occupational Health and Safety is doing their due diligence with the contractor. That process usually takes 3 to 5 weeks. They're 3 weeks into that process, so anticipate seeing something happening in the next 2 weeks related to the cleanup. With respect to the security that remains on site, I would assume, and I'd have to find out, we're actually meeting with the curling club tomorrow so we can ask this question, but would assume that that's an insurance cost. Can't confirm whose insurance, but certainly insurance, the town is not responsible for that security.
Excellent. Appreciate those answers, and glad to hear that will hopefully be undertaken before the snow flies, so it doesn't become a little bit more of a challenge.
Your Worship, just for clarity, it should be a 3 to 5 day commencement as soon as I get their permit, and it doesn't sound like it'll be a very long duration for the haul out and cleanup. So I think once they get started, we'll be very happy with the outcome.
Excellent. Thank you. And second to last for me, I've seen a few updates from the mayor of the city of Spruce Grove, but we haven't received an update. So I'm wondering if administration can update us on the Boundary Road trail connection between Stony Plain and Spruce Grove, what the current progress is on that, and if we have an ETA as to when we feel that project may be complete.
Your Worship, I know that I think we received some stuff internally. Again, our general manager is not with us in the room at this point. I can certainly find out from him what the timing is and the updates, and we can get that out to council.
Okay. And then the last that I have is a question to administration. In the Alberta Transportation Project on Highway 779, it included the construction of a storm pond on the west side of Highway 779 to the south of 57th Avenue. It would be almost across from John Paul II School and in behind the George Henning Center there. The storm pond is quite close to 12 housing units that exist in our community that are Habitat for Humanity housing. Speaking with a couple of people there, I found in those 12 units there are at least 8 units with children, and directly behind those units also exists a small playground in which is used very frequently by the children. Throughout the construction process, there was temporary fencing erected, and after the pond was completed, there was a orange snow fence put in place. And the residents had believed at that point in time that either Alberta Transportation or the town would be constructing a fence in between the units and the storm pond due to the proximity and the potential safety issues. To date, that snow fence has now fallen down and is completely ineffective, and I've had a couple of residents of the area express some concern on that. So I'm curious if administration knows if that was part of the Alberta Transportation scope of project, was for them to construct a fence in between those houses and the storm pond.
Thank you, Your Worship and Councillor Laurie. So I won't be able to speak definitively at this point in time. We would have to look into it, but I would expect that fencing that storm pond is not part of Alberta Transportation's original scope of work. That would be my general expectation. I wouldn't, I'll just stop there. It would be my general expectation that it's not part of the scope of work.
So if I may follow up on that, Your Worship? Okay. Thank you. In several areas of our communities where we have storm ponds that back directly onto residential, or residential that backs directly onto storm ponds, the builder developer has constructed fences at the back of the property line for what I would presume would be safety and security of the particular residents in those units. Do we have any development standards that speak to this? Obviously, you know, we're more than happy to put signs up around our storm ponds and things like that. And I don't know that I can think of an instance where we have a playground this close to a storm pond in any way, shape, or form. And, you know, I'm curious, speaking with a company, the cost for that 300 feet of fencing would be around $6,000. And to me, it's a significant safety issue that if it could be remediated by $6,000, I mean, I would like to think that Alberta Transportation constructing that pond in that location could step up to the table. But if they're not going to, I would be interested to know if we have any policies around that, and if not, what would be the steps for us to take to look at assisting in that? Because unfortunately, being that that is Habitat for Humanity housing, the ability of the residents of those to afford such an expense likely is not there.
Yeah, Your Worship, and through to Councillor Laurie and the rest of Council. So, yeah, you know, stormwater safety and siting and so on, you know, I mean, tends to be a dialogue in most communities, and whether it's summertime or wintertime when there's ice on there. Excuse me. So I'm getting a few quick messages from our general manager as I speak. So it does appear that this has been a discussion internally at the town of Stony Plain. It does appear that they have some solutions that they're considering, and that they would consider moving forward with, i.e. fencing. So what I would ask is that again, we allow that our general manager to continue working on that, and we can get you a further detailed update. I'm going to say by the end of the week about where we're going with that. And he hasn't objected to by the end of the week, so.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Administration. I would love a detailed update through email by the end of the week on that, so that I can get back to the residents that are there. Thank you. That's all for me this evening, Your Worship. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Laurie. Just an FYI for members of council, Councillor Bennett passed me a note because she forgot to mention this earlier, that in due process, today was a good day for Folkestone Manor. We had 7 residents move into the facility, so the first residents of the community, so that's good job on that, to have more affordable housing for emerging seniors in the community, working with Legion and everybody else. So thank you very much, Councillor Bennett. Just one question for administration. I had a resident contact me about the micro sealing that happened in West Terra. Just a little note about the cleanliness of after the micro sealing is done. There's a lot of big black rocks everywhere and stuff. Do we actually go around and kind of clean that up after, or does the contractor clean that up?
Worship, maybe I'll just have our general manager respond directly via email on what we do with that. I don't know the answer to that at this point.
Thank you. Okay, and just for note, Wednesday the 29th is the political forum from 6 to 9 p.m. So if you are not participating in it, please go watch it. It should be fun, as always. I think the thank the Parkland Parkland Regional Chamber of Commerce, I think is the name, for hosting it. So I think it'd be kind of on their Facebook page or on their social media feed. So definitely, if you have the opportunity to look at it. And also, September 30th is a National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, as approved by the federal government, and the town of Stony Plain is recognizing that day, as to make sure that we take the opportunity to kind of reflect what's happened throughout our history and look at ways to reconcile and move forward as a society. Okay. And with that, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, administration for providing the agenda packages, and members of council for reading them and bringing their questions and comments to the floor. With that, we're adjourned.